Welcome to the Spectators Podcast. Here are your hosts, Corey and Jeff.
Welcome, spectators, to another edition of the Spectators Podcast, video edition and audio edition. We're moving up in the world. My name is Jeff, and to my mic adjacent, Corey. And as I said, Corey, you're pretty brave wearing that Los Angeles Angels hat after what happened just the other day.
Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, I started the first episode, the video episode, with my Jays hat last time, so I thought I'd change it up as I have quite a few different sports hats, and I'm repping my Shohei Ohtani hat here.
Oh, you talking about that hat?
Yeah, so I thought I'd rep this one and change it up. I might wear a different hat every episode.
Yeah, and as you can see, I'm on a different place in my house, so maybe when you wear different hats, I'll just pick different locations.
Different
in
locations.
My house. Yeah, just
the next
change it
one
up
will be
for me.
on a bench in the park. But how
Absolutely.
are you?
I'm good. Yeah, no, it's scorching hot here in BC, but we've hit this moment. We've talked about it a few times. The podcast has turned 21, so it can now drink in the United States of America.
It can, and I think, we can either do two things. We can either keep a leash on it to make sure it's okay, or we're just going to let it free roam into the world like a butterfly that it is.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see. It can make its choices now. We'll just have to hope that you and I taught it good values in its infancy.
At least I think we did.
That's always the hope. So Friday was a day, I'd have to say. I am on my balcony, so you will hear children. You will hear an air conditioner in the background. I do apologize. Working with two small children in my life, so my apologies. So yes, Friday was a day. I think I'm not a smoker, but I definitely lit up a cigarette before I went to bed on Friday because I just couldn't handle all of the news. There was the Jays game, which the Jays destroyed the Los Angeles Angels.
Boston Red Sox, actually.
I thought it was the Angels.
It was the Red Sox, yeah.
Oh, that's even worse for the Boston fans.
Yeah.
Wait, so the Reds. Oh, interesting. So two big pieces of news happened in Boston then, because it was obviously that's when we found out. So Vince McMahon retired from the WWE, and then Matthew Tkachuk got traded to Florida, which I didn't think was possible. So big pieces of news. I don't know where to start, so I'm gonna force you to pick the topic we just discussed.
Well, I'll quickly start with just the smallest topic here, and that was Matthew Tkachuk getting traded to Florida. We knew this was going to happen. He was going to go somewhere. He was telling Calgary he wasn't going to re-sign with them. But it is a surprise that he did sign to Florida. I didn't expect that to happen. When I first heard of the deal, I don't know why I glanced over it for some reason and did not see Jonathan Huberdeau in that trade. But it's an interesting trade because you have Huberdeau, who got 115 points last season, and Tkachuk, who got 104. But you also have a 4 or 5 year age gap between the two. So
He's close to the same age as JT Miller.
Right.
I think he's 29.
Huberdeau? Yeah, he's 29.
Huberdeau, yeah.
Yeah. So he's the same age as JT Miller, about 15, 16 points more. But it was a big deal. Like, for Tkachuk, Calgary, Florida gave up a lot, I think, for one player, really. And I think there was a draft pick that also went to Florida or something like that. Yeah.
There's so many themes. It's funny you say it's a smaller topic because it is. Like, Vince McMahon retiring actually is probably
the biggest thing that happened on Friday, for sure.
It's massive news, but I think it equally this trade is historic. Historic is the wrong word, but it was a huge. It's one of the biggest trades I can remember since following hockey. It's big on so many fronts. One, it's technically actually the first sign-in trade in NHL history. He actually signed with the Flames first, and then subsequently got dealt to Florida. So that's kind of an interesting little wrinkle. That came out today or Saturday that it was that. And then Brad Treliving. He owns Boston Pizza. That's just how I see it now.
He's on Dragon's Den. It's easy to mix up.
Well, Jim's not anymore, but he
anymore.
definitely when I used to watch it. So he signed and went to Florida, which is interesting because he didn't have any trade protection, I don't think, in his contract. But I think Calgary was doing what was right by the player. But I think what's more surprising is the return they got. So they got Jonathan Huber, they got Mackenzie Weegar, Colton Schmidt, I think the guy's name is, like a third-round pick, and then a conditional first-round pick in 2025. That pick moves to 2026 if Florida, it's top 10 protected. So if they get the pick in the top 10 in 2025, then it goes to 2026. Now, on the Calgary side, I think the Florida side more interesting, so we'll focus on the Calgary side first. I think on the Calgary side, what's impressive, calm down, dog. I'm sure you can hear that dog right now.
Yeah.
My apologies again. It's a very active building I live in. On the Calgary side, I think what's fascinating is he was able to take a potentially franchise deflating situation in the fact that Gaudreau left, and then your 25-year-old 40 goal scorer decides he doesn't want to stay with you, and I think get a pretty decent, pretty franchise saving trade if you really think about it, right? Because you get a 115-point player back in Huberdeau, who it can instantly go on your top line. They have Andrew Mangiapane that can move up to the first line because he scored 30 goals. I mean, Mackenzie Weegar actually I think is more surprising of a return than I thought they would get. Like, I think if you had a Huberdeau the first and a prospect, I think that's a pretty good return. I'm not too sure why Florida was so willing to include Weegar. Maybe there was quite a bidding war for Tkachuk. That's probably what was it. But Weegar's like a top 4, potentially top 2 defenseman. Like, he's a really, really good defenseman. So I think hats have to go off to Brad Treliving for this trade. Like, it's like he certainly saved his team from something that could have been really franchise altering, right? Like, last podcast we were saying, like, are we watching the Calgary Flames just falter in front of our eyes? And I think the answer is clearly no. Like, he went out and hit a home run, in my opinion. The biggest amount of risk, though, is that Mackenzie Weegar and Jonathan Huberdeau are both UFA after next year.
Yep.
So they do have to sign these guys, I believe, to make this trade. Well, if they win a cup, I guess it would be fine. But to really make this trade okay,
I would say they have to at least sign one of them, and probably if you're going to make this trade really worth it, you have to probably sign Huberdeau because you're getting kind of a trade off there, right? Forward for forward, and
yeah, you kind of want Weegar though,
but
right?
you want Weegar long term probably too. So
because what do they have? They have Tanev and Hanifin and Rasmus Anderson. I don't know who else played on the. Then they had Zadorov and Gudbranson. I'm missing one defenseman. But they do actually kind of need to sign Weegar too. I don't know what Calgary's cap situation looks like next year, but I know they've given themselves some cap space actually, but they are going to arbitration with Andrew Mangiapane. So
right.
They're gonna have to be careful. I also read something today that Jonathan Huberdeau is not a fan of what happened. He was actually really wanting to stay in Florida and sign, and he hadn't heard anything from Florida all summer. Then the next thing he hears, he's heading over to Calgary.
Getting traded, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. Dust might settle, and he might, because I can imagine Brad Treliving is calling him right now and saying, like, can we please figure out something?
Yeah.
Because I wonder if he goes, no, I want to leave it till the off season. Like, well, apparently teams have already called Brad and said, like, hey, what are you doing with Jonathan? You want to trade him? Because I think they're just wondering what Calgary wants to do. But
well, there's definitely going to be teams that are interested in him, right? He's sitting right now.
Yeah.
a good point scorer, good team.
He's only making $5 million.
He's only making $5 million, and he's in his prime, right? 29 years old. So, I mean, there's going to be teams who are interested, and if he gets signed long term, whether that means he's going to Calgary or he signs long term with another team, you got to imagine he's going to get a pretty decent deal. He's going to make it in that 7-year kind of 8 or 9 million probably is what he's going to ask for.
Calgary probably try and pitch the 8-year on him because they're the only team that can do that unless he gets traded.
Right.
But yeah, no, I honestly I think it was a really good return. Like I think it's a better return than I thought they were going to get for Gaudreau. I saw a rumor that like what was it? St. Louis offered Jordan Kyrou, Torrey Krug with some salary retention and a first-round pick, I think, which is decent return.
And that was for Tkachuk, you mean?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. St. Louis was offering, which again, that was a rumor. That wasn't anything confirmed. But apparently New Jersey was quite hot for him as well. But at the end of the day, Florida wins, and I think because Florida offered, because I think it's quite a haul. So that's the Florida side. The Calgary side. If you look at the Florida side, I think it's even more fascinating. Obviously, they are in win now mode, and they make this trade for a very, very good player and a superstar. Really, I mean, the guy got 40 goals, and he's only 25, and he plays a kind of game that analysts and I agree with, like, are a game that most teams want. He's fast, he can hit, he's tough, and he can score. Right, like every single team is looking for that kind of guy. So he definitely is a rare commodity. I mean, it's kind of like guys like Zach Kassian kept getting opportunities, right? Because he had the potential to be something like this, right?
Right? Teams want grit, size, and strength to go along with the goal scoring, right?
I think in the end, like the trade makes sense for both sides. However, I certainly think Calgary won this trade. Because if you look at Florida, I was reading and listening to some analysis of the trade, especially on the Florida side, because I haven't followed Florida that much. God, now, of course, there's planes flying over my house, but it's just like they've weakened themselves in this. And remember how we talked about like a Connor McDavid or a Sidney Crosby trade, and like when you trade for a superstar, you end up actually weakening yourself a little bit. To make yourself better, and Florida did that, right? In the sense that like they didn't weaken themselves in the sense of like trading Coop Huberdeau for Tkachuk. I think that's a pretty comparable trade. Tkachuk's quite younger and he's on a pretty reasonable contract of 8 times 9.5, which, by the way, only $1 million is in salary. The rest is in bonuses, which is crazy. But I think where they weaken themselves now is in 2 avenues. One is defense. Like their defense is significantly weaker now. Not significantly, but it's weaker for sure, right? Like really, like their best defenseman is Aaron Ekblad. But after that, like they've got Rico Gudas. What's his name? Oh, I'm blanking on their defense core, but like it's not as good with Mackenzie Weegar. Mackenzie Weegar's a really good player. And then another thing where they really weaken themselves is, as I mentioned to you, Florida doesn't have a first-round pick now until 2026.
Right.
I think it's the NBA. I believe it's the NBA because of how they were tanking so much. They actually have a rule now where you can't trade your first-round picks that far in advance. That you're actually not allowed to do that because so many teams would do this to stay competitive. They would just keep trading their first round picks. And you can debate certainly. Florida's going to be a really good team, and it's going to be a late first rounder. So really, like, does it really matter? My view is that you're right. But at the end of the day, like when you're a competitive team, you do need people on entry-level salaries to come on your team or cheap contracts, right? Not everyone's like Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay everyone will point to them as an exception, but they have an internal system that I don't think can be replicated anywhere else, right? Like they just figure it out, right? And they trade their first round picks for Brandon Hagel, right? So really, Florida just doesn't seem to like first round picks, is what I've deciphered from these trades. But so I think Florida may have gotten a little blinded by the idea of bringing in someone like Tkachuk, because I mean he'll sell tickets, right? Because he's American, and obviously he's a well-known name in the U.S. So certainly he'll bring in people to watch hockey. But looking from from some time to reflect, I think in the end, this might bite Florida in the butt a little bit with how much they gave away. I think they gave away a little too much,
Agreed.
and then just not having that first round pick for a while. I mean, maybe they have a good scouting staff and they can try and mine some talent out of the second round on. I don't know what their second or to seventh round pick looks like, but or you can go the European route. Like there's other ways, but it's usually it's good. It's a good idea to at least have one first round pick in a few years. Just I mean, like even Tampa picked in the first round this year, right?
Yeah.
So at least they recognize they do need some young people in their system. But yeah, no. So it's an interesting trade on both ends, and I think it'll be one to certainly watch. Be one of those ones we can dissect for years. I think on who won and the merits of that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it did seem like a little bit of a lopsided trade in some regard, but I guess the ultimate question is, how much better will Calgary be with these two players coming in, and how much better will Florida be long term with Matthew Tkachuk in the lineup? Like, what's your opinion? Do you think that we talked about Florida a few episodes back, right? We talked about them when they got knocked out in the playoffs this year. They were lacking some things. They had some holes. They had to fill some of those opportunities. Do you think this is an opportunity they really needed to give up what they gave up? Do you think the trade-off is going to make them push to that next level?
I don't know. I mean, Kachuk is the type of player they were looking for, right? Like they needed a guy with a bit more that's the word of in here in Vancouver, sandpaper. Like they needed a bit more gritty guys. Like they were a high skill team. They ran away with the Atlantic in the regular season, but then they ran up against. Funny enough, they ran up against Tampa, who that was their issue a few years ago when they got swept by Columbus. Like they were a high octane team that just really didn't play that good defense. Now Tampa's learned from that. They went up against Florida and showed them what it's like when you just kind of depend on the run and gun style, right? Well, I mean, a little bit. I mean, like these playoffs had ridiculously high scores, and offense really seemed to be the key to winning this year, plus depth. So I don't know. Like apparently they're still over the cap, so they still got to make some moves.
Right.
So yeah, I think today certainly they've I don't know. Like I guess they've improved their forward depth a little bit. Like they've brought in a type of player they didn't have, right? The type of player that they feel probably they need to beat a Tampa or a Toronto. But on the flip side, they also weaken themselves, especially on defense. And I don't know how you replace a top four defender, potential top two defender in Mackenzie Weegar, especially when you're over the cap. And they don't have any prospects or our first round picks to trade anymore. So Florida's in a really interesting situation. I think I see two teams in Florida and Philadelphia that are really hoping their coaches, because they hired Paul Maurice now, and Philadelphia's got Torts. Those two teams are really hoping the coach can really get more out of the team.
To get more out of the team. Yeah.
Than they have, like more. What do they say? More than the sum of its parts, right? Like Florida's still a really good team. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
And they've got, but like, yeah, it'd be really interesting to see like how it plays out. Because I'm fat. Like I think if you look at it long term, like the contract for Tkachuk is really good. I don't think they were going to have the money to sign Huberdeau and Weegar, so they were going to lose one of them at some point, right? Maybe you mine them for assets, but so I can definitely see on Florida side why you would include a Weegar, because you're like, well, we're not going to be able to sign him anyways, and we'll add him as a sweetener to really convince Calgary to give us Tkachuk. But yeah, I do think they've made themselves a little weaker, to be honest, with this trade. But it's one of those things. I think they would argue that like it's almost never you see a player like Matthew Tkachuk at the age he is become available, and you do everything you can to get him.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I do think they made themselves weaker, but they had to seize an opportunity that may not come again. And I think that's why they did what they did. On Calgary's perspective, I think they were a good team last year. They did quite well. They landed, second or third in the...
No, didn't they finish first?
They finished first in the division. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. So, will they finish first again? that's hard to say with them losing both Kachuk and Goudreau this year. But picking up a really solid defenseman, which is something I think they needed, and you say also long term something they really need, and picking up a player like Huberdeau who could potentially put up another 115, 120 point season again, they may actually be walking into the season being better than they were last year to some regard.
You still lost Goudreau.
You still lost Goudreau. But
there's that. However, like, you still have pieces like this. There's Calgary's still a really good team, and that's why I thought when we discussed, let's just say they all they could get for Kachuk was futures. Like, what do you do? Because you're not horrible enough to really tank, and you're not good enough to really they probably would have missed the playoffs if they they weren't able to replace either of them in some way. So I think they've done an excellent job in sort of keeping themselves a contender, because I think we've discussed, outside of Colorado, like, the West is kind of open, right? I mean, look at playoffs last year, right? Like, really, the only team that was sure to make it was Colorado, right? Other than that, it was a toss-up, right? I mean, Edmonton did beat Calgary in the end, but it wasn't necessarily easy. I mean, I know it was 5 games, but each game was close, right? And
each game's the goaltending wasn't there, and it was a scoring machine of a game, so it was awful. It was awful in that sense.
So we'll see. Like, I'm really curious. I do think Calgary keeps themselves competitive, very competitive, and I'd say pretty close to a contender, especially in the West. Yeah. Because Colorado is probably going to be the favorite to come out of the West again. Unless Vegas figures it out, right? Vegas is always...
Well, I think the one thing about Vegas is it has to come down to the injuries. If they can come out of the season without injuries, if they can have goaltending, we know Robin Lehner has potential to be a very good goaltender, but he can't be injured and he has to stay consistent. If that's the case, and Mark Stone can stay injury-free, Eichel can play up to his full potential, and the loss of Pacioretty hurts, but if they can do those kind of things, they could still be a contender, but it's up in the air right now, and I think it's a very uncertain team. But I feel like Calgary's kept themselves competitive. I think that's an important thing for them. They've managed to keep themselves probably within the top 3. I'd say they have a good chance to.
I agree with that.
Which is going to be important for them, because they don't want to be chasing a wild card. And especially with those 2 players out, they would probably not even be close to chasing a wild card. We talked about it last episode, saying the loss of the 2 players probably takes them from a top 3 to a bottom 3 that fast. They kind of filled some of that gap and filled the defensive gap, which will probably keep them in that top 3, which is good. Then I feel like everything in the wild card right at this point is very up in the air, so we don't really know where teams are going to sit. But I think, good for them to keep themselves competitive, and then we'll see where they can go with the long-term potential contracts of these 2 players, because if they can hold on to them, it could be a good thing for them in the future.
Yeah, I do wonder. Because the trend that we're seeing is that players really are just wanting to really pick their spots, right? And this year was a lot of player movement, and we haven't necessarily seen in the NHL. NHL is usually the boring sport where everyone just signs and stays with their team. Really, because that's how hockey culture is. You just you're committed to your team, and you don't. But really, it's just
you don't see a lot of players going out there and leaving teams for money very often. Just even a couple years ago when Nathan McKinnon was talking about coming back to Colorado. He was saying things like, I'm not going to leave the team to take more money because I want to stay with my team. He had that average attitude of a hockey player wanting to commit to their team, which is very different, because most sports you do see, show me the money and I'll walk your way. So
what's his name from the Nats? Is it Soto?
Yeah.
440 million he turned down.
He just turned down because he knows he's going to make more. I think, what did I hear? There was a player who, I can't remember who it was, but there was a player who just signed for somewhere in the realm of 250 million, somewhere 240 or 245 for only 4 or 5 years, which is insane. I think it comes out to 46 million average per year, which is you wouldn't even get close to that in hockey. Not even close.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's usually 46 million is the total of a contract, not a year.
In 4 or 5 years, 46
Yeah.
million. That's half of Johnny Gaudreau's 9-year contract, right?
Exactly.
So there you go.
Yeah, I think the highest paid player is McDavid. He's making 13, so that's where we're at here, right? So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see. And it was it was actually out of the shocking news on Friday. It was the last
It was the
thing to
lightest.
drop.
That's why I said let's talk about it first, because
That's the last thing to drop. I'm sure all the insiders were pissed off because they were at their cabins and drinking their margaritas. I'm thinking about Bob McKenzie mostly. He's retired, but yeah, no, it definitely dropped. It was so quiet because it was like I finished watching SmackDown and I was like, oh, I'm just gonna go on Twitter, and then just all of a sudden, oh yeah, Kachuk's going to Florida. I was like, holy crap, it really came out of nowhere. But yeah, no, before we dive into the WWE, I did want to quickly. The other big piece of news on Friday was we heard about
the second investigation from Hockey Canada.
incident on Hockey Canada from the 2003 team, and it just makes me think there's going to be more, like more and more and more.
I was literally just talking about this last night and saying that you see something from 2003, and you see something from 2018. And you got to imagine that we talked about it last time, how Hockey Canada has used this fund for issues like this, right?
Yeah.
You got to imagine between all that time, that's a big gap in time. That's a 15-year gap in time. You have to imagine there's been other things in there that
they've covered up
somehow in those 15 years. But you also have to think probably prior to that 2003, there are probably these other things that have been covered up too, which is really unfortunate. And just like the WWE and how we saw more things start to progress, I'm guessing we'll probably see more allegations or other things pop up as we go along with these investigations. That's just what I'm thinking.
Well, they have another hearing set up this week. All of Hockey Canada is going to go back.
Right.
They're actually going to talk to all the commissioners of the CHL. And the CHL commissioner. So like pretty much like the government of Canada is like, this is enough. Like this is absolute garbage.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping they do the same thing with Gymnastics Canada, like we brought up last week. But yeah, just another very, very upsetting and infuriating piece of news. And I seriously hope that they completely dismantle Hockey Canada and figure out something else, because this just can't keep happening. And again, I love hockey. I mean, you know that. I'm sure our listeners know that hockey is my favorite sport. And if my kids were able to play come this fall, I wouldn't put them in right now.
Right.
I'm just so dejected by what's happening, and I need to see some serious change in Hockey Canada, and also more of a discourse about how we change hockey culture, because it's still taught the same way today. Yes, there's more awareness, but still, we need I need the NHL commissioner to come out and say that hockey culture needs to be changed, because he was asked that a few months ago. Is there a problem with hockey culture? And he said no, there is no problem. Clearly there is, because right after that, two mass investigate. And let's be clear too, USA hockey is nowhere better.
Just hockey in general.
Yeah, like USA hockey. I believe, to my knowledge, we're aware of what was going on with I can't remember the guy who's the assaulter in Chicago. His name is escaping me now, but they hired him even though they really kind of knew what was going on with him. And again, I'm sure there's a ton of similar stories that we'll probably eventually hear from that. So the somber news on Friday was that. So here's hoping that the Canadian government tells Hockey Canada, well, whatever, basically just says you need to dismantle. And I hope, as much as we've talked in this podcast about the business of sport and people losing their jobs, but I think I'd like to see some people lose their jobs. And honestly, you have let so many people down, and you have hurt so many people, with the sexual assault, and also you've let these people believe that they can just do this shit and get away with it. That's also very hurtful if you think about it, because they're going to go on and do the same shit to other, hockey. You were supposed to teach these young men how to be a good human being, right? And hockey talks about it all the time. Oh, we're teaching them to be good humans, and
discipline and respect and
good
team
character guy in the room, right? Like all that bullshit. But clearly, it's not. I mean, I can't paint all of hockey with that brush. Can't paint all of
hockey like that, yeah. But
like, Hockey Canada clearly isn't showing that was their number one motivation, right? So it was protect the brand and pay these people off and let's move on. We don't want to deal with it.
Well, it's crazy even to think that even a few years ago, like you said, Gary Bettman said there's no problem with hockey culture, and I mean, I've always thought there's probably little problems here and there, small things, but like to hear things like this that are this drastic, the culture hasn't been fantastic, right? There's always been a culture of silence, but and there's a lot of like unnecessary politics that go on in hockey. We know that, but just to hear this and now two things in such a short period of time, and like we just said, there's probably going to be more things that'll accumulate. Something needs to change. Whoever makes that change, whether it's Hockey Canada or the government or whatever, they dismantle and rebrand. Something's got to give, and I think it's something that's got to happen. We talk about positions of leadership. And we talk about being able to lead by example. I think the NHL needs to do something too. The NHL has to stand for what everyone does, because people will follow by example, right? You will see NHL do something, the CHL will lead as well. You'll see all of those things happen. So I can see it kind of being a
trickle down effect.
Trickle down effect, right? If something like that is done.
We just need someone to act like an adult. I'm sorry. Like, seriously, isn't that fucking hard to get someone to act like an adult? And again, like I said last time, protect children. Like, seriously. Like, is it that fucking hard? Clearly it is. But, yeah, anyways, we'll move on before I start yelling again. That was some hard news. But the biggest piece of news for us in regards to the Spectators podcast was, we've talked weeks and weeks about what's going to happen with this investigation with Vince McMahon, what's the future of the WWE, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Vince McMahon himself sends out a tweet that literally, I think, almost broke Twitter. He announced his retirement. He said at 77, it's time for him to retire and step away from professional wrestling. And, I don't think I've seen my Twitter that in such a, I think I sent you that picture where it was just like a room on fire, right? Like
the whole wrestling community was chaos that day because Vinnie Mac retiring, we know he was the kind of guy that isn't gonna decide to retire. Hey, yeah, I'm 75 and it's time for me to retire. We both had speculation that this guy would go as far as he would go until he literally can't stand up and do it anymore or he's dead. And we talked about this in previous episodes. So for him to just abruptly, and it wasn't really abruptly if you really think about it, we've had time to kind of sleep on it. He's been in trouble. He's had some allegations, major allegations. We've talked about this in previous episodes. We're not going to bring it up again. But there had to be something in the room. There had to be some family decision, whether it was his daughter, his son, his wife, his friends,
or the board
themselves, telling him, Vince, I think it's time. Because you think about it, he walks away, and the allegations, whatever is proven, because he said in his letter of retirement, he said at the end, whatever happens from this investigation, I'm going to cooperate. I said from the beginning, I'm going to continue to cooperate, and whatever happens and comes out of it, good or bad, I'm going to take full responsibility. And, the thing is, if he's out of that board of directors room and the responsibility's on him, the responsibility's on him. And
it's no longer the WWE.
It's no longer on Stephanie. It's no longer on his wife. It's no longer on his son. It's no longer on WWE as a company and anyone who worked for him. Who, the man may be a monster in some people's eyes, but at the same time, he has a lot of people he cares about and works with and has worked with for a really long time that he has a lot of respect for, and he doesn't want to hurt those people. So him walking away makes the most sense for the company's protection, and I kind of make sense why they would say, hey, it's probably time to step away.
Well, he's the majority shareholder too, so there's some selfish intention in there, right? Too, right? Yep. So like you said, once the hammer does come down, right? It's not going to be on the W because if like maybe we discussed at length, right? Like it was like, oh, okay, well, if they find this investigation that he's guilty of some of these things, like pretty like, and then he stays, it's just going to be such a black mark, such a distraction, and it has been a distraction for the most part. People are talking about the investigation versus what's going on with WWE, right? It's really like it goes 50-50 of like what's going on in WWE with SummerSlam and things like that. Then there's this Vince McMahon thing, right?
And it screws all the talent, really,
Yeah.
because it takes away from, like, we talked about it. I think personally, you think about it and you're like, I want to watch the show for the show. I want to watch the show for these guys, these girls. I want to watch the talent do what they do best. And it's hard to watch, and it's hard to think about those things because you have this gray cloud above you thinking, fuck, like, I don't want to support Vince. I don't want to support, the bad things that are happening, even though he's not there yet. And we know that with being proven, still puts a bad light on it, and it's not fair to the competitors. It's not fair to them, and we talked about that. So him being away, it definitely gives you the chance to say, okay, now I can focus on the talent. Now we can focus on SummerSlam. I'm actually really enjoying it, and I want to get back to it. And that's for fans, that's for talent, that's for staff, that's for so many people in the industry. And speaking of the industry, how it affects other brands. Because something like this happened to Vince McMahon, it does put a bad vibe on the whole industry.
Did you see Tony Khan's tweet like 15 minutes after Vince McMahon retired?
Yeah, I mean he's a comic.
I am now the longest serving
CEO.
What a savage!
Well, not only did he say that, but he said his kind words about Vince, right? Saying thank you for it. None of this would have been possible without you, which is very true. But he also said thank you for making me the longest serving.
Oh, I didn't see that
which
part.
Is funny because
that's pretty savage right there.
Well, they have a lot of direction they can go in now, and that's the cool thing. You have Stephanie come in as a co-CEO. I think you and I can both say we're both happy about this decision. I'm not sure how I feel about Nick Khan, and we've talked about this too.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes as we go along. There's a lot of speculation out there, and you've probably seen it on Twitter too. There is a lot of people who think that Nick Khan was in on telling the board and bringing this allegation to Wall Street Journal about Vince McMahon to kind of like bring him down, because it seems like Nick wants to take over. I mean, it's not going to be that easy, to take over a company like this. It's a $4 or $5 billion company or something. So you can't just he's probably not rich enough to buy in on his own, but take him down is one step closer to him being full CEO, and a lot of people joking around that Stephanie's his next target. I hope that's not the case. I'm happy with Stephanie in the role she's going to be in. I think she'll probably play it smart. I believe she'll take a lot of the business endeavors. She'll take a little bit of creative, but she won't be as involved in creative as Vince was. And I think that's going to be important. But, she is a pioneer of pushing the women's division, right? She was the one who created the first women's only pay-per-view. I think she's the one who's backing Liv, and I think you probably agree with me there. And Triple H is a kind of guy, seeing him back in the EVP, executive vice president role of talent relations, the talent is happy. They want him there. He was in that role before. They did let him out of that role to give it to John Laurinaitis, who we now have gotten confirmation that he is gone. He's not coming back to WWE. And you had mentioned Vince Dunn is also gone from the creative team today. So that's an interesting one, because I know that he's been a bit of an ass clown as well with the talent in the back. And I mean, there's been rumors for a long time that he's not been the greatest. So
I saw a rumor that he said that Becky wasn't pretty enough to be women's champion.
Oh yeah, I was gonna bring that up. So thanks for bringing that up. I couldn't believe it. I read that today, that she is not attractive enough to be the women's champion. WWE has a really bad. I read this article about it, and WWE has a really bad case, which they've always viewed their talent. They will always hire a individual who looks better than they can wrestle. And they're always going to have a physical appearance better than they can actually perform in the ring. We saw that with talent like The Miz when he first came in. they signed him because of his looks, not because of, he didn't
His
have the
talent.
best body. He wasn't the most talented. He wasn't even greatest on the mic. There are situations like The Miz where they can turn it around and become a very legendary superstar, but it doesn't always happen. It's unfortunate, but I think with Triple H or Paul Levesque in role, we'll probably see some more talent come in that are actually really talented, and there's been conversation about a few top AEW stars which contracts are ending very, very soon, that they're Kenny Omega within the next 6 months, that they could potentially sign him, and Triple H is the kind of guy that would want to sign him. Vince, it's hard because Kenny is so talented in the ring. He has the physique, but he's not Vince's cup of tea. Vince never liked him because he's a little more soft-spoken, and Kenny's also a little bit more probably feminine looking than some others, so they don't necessarily like that. And that's just what I've heard from rumors of why he hasn't been signed before. Triple H wouldn't see it that way. He's just going to look at talent and he's going to be like, I'm going to bring them in. So, I mean, yeah, we went off on a tangent here, but Vince leaving is going to, it was a shocker the day of, but we've already seen some moves in backstage, and it's going to be a revolutionary change for the WWE with him gone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I thought about the most around this, I mean, just quick side before I get into my bigger point, was that, like, you could see the instant change, right, with SmackDown. Like, it was quite interesting. Like, Stephanie does her quick thing. It was great. It was just like, thanks Vince for everything. Thanks Dad, and let's do a thank you Vince chant, and then we'll move on, right? So, I think that was a nice little homage to Vince, but like didn't make too much.
No, and you could see the fans wanted it, because if you look at it, like, before she even got to the point where wanting to chant the thank you Vince, they were already chanting it.
They were booing that he was retiring.
All of his BS aside, I'm very appreciative of what he did to the industry.
Well, so that's my bigger point. So here's my bigger point about this. I think his retirement comes at a really interesting crossroads or intersection, in the fact that it's his legacy. Because whenever we're retired, you talk about what's their legacy. His legacy, I think, is incredibly complicated, because it's got two massive wings or forks in it, right? You got the one fork where he I think it's fair to say he is the reason why professional wrestling is the way it is today, right?
Why it's a global industry, yeah.
There's that. I mean, I don't think we see any of the other, like, ROH, AEW. Well, I'm sure it was big in Japan, but like, he's the reason for the wrestling we're seeing today, and obviously he with the Altitude Era and things like that, and the stars that came and went from WWE. Like, he is the reason professional wrestling exists. I don't think anyone can really argue that, or dispute it, despite of what's happened recently with him. So I think there's that one wing about Vince, right? And and the other thing about that wing too is, like, he's also, there's good parts of Vince too, if that makes sense, right? Like,
of course,
the talent talks about, they love him. He was there for them.
A lot of people had actually said they saw him as more of a father figure too.
Yeah, there's that. Like, talent talks about how well they were treated under him. Like, John Cena, I think, like, talks glowingly of him. So does like Undertaker. Even Chris Jericho, who left the company, still
talks really well of him. Yeah,
still holds him in high regard, and I don't think that's invalid. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's hard sometimes when you see these things, right, about, like, what's going on for Vince, because, like, there is a dark side, and I'll get to that in a minute. But, like, it's also fair to recognize the other side, because people are complicated, right? Like, people are complicated people, right? Like, even though you could have some really nasty, bad things about your personality, there are also good things about that person, right? Some things can't trump the other, if that makes sense, right? Like, he's a murderer. We can't go, oh, he's a nice guy too, right?
Yeah.
He's also a murderer.
Yeah.
But I think in this essence, I think it's something that just, for me, is equal. Whereas like we talk about the one side that we're talking about, in that, like, he revolutionized the wrestling industry. I think he did treat talent well. He's taken some people's careers to a high. Like, look at the Rock, John Cena, Steve Austin, right?
And
Taker, right?
one of the things I didn't even think about that I don't know if you're going to touch on too, is he played such a revolutionary character, as well as what he did in the background. Of like, he was like that ultimate true heel of what a heel should be, right? Like throughout his entire career, and some of it's probably got some truth to it. Whereas as we're seeing, but he did really kind of reinvent that heel almost on his own as well. But go ahead.
So there's that one wing, right? And I think it's you can't not talk about it, right? Because it's just so true, and it has to be acknowledged, right? That he was this man, this revolutionary man, this businessman, right? That really took this product and made it so enjoyable for so many years. Obviously, it was tailing off in the end, and people were getting tired of it. And in the end, like, Vince really did change the wrestling world, and we're thankful he did, because now we're sitting on a podcast talking about it, right? So like, there's that's because of Vince, right? Now that's the one wing. The second wing, obviously, is what we've now discovered of what the other side of Vince looks like.
The elephant in the room, yep.
Which is like sexual predator, bully, right? Ruthless businessman, and the fact he doesn't have medical benefits for his wrestlers, and really, as soon as they're out of wrestling, that's it. And there's lots of wrestlers now, like some that have enjoyed success, like The Rock and Cena and all those folks. There's been some that have some debilitating injuries from doing their working in the WWE, and Vince just really refusing, saying, once you're done with us, I'm done with you, right? Like, they're contracted employees. They're not employees of the company, so they don't have those things. So it's such a tainted legacy, if that makes sense to me. Like, I'm sad that, like, someone on the other side, where we're talking about, with like, that has done so many great things for people, for a company, for sports entertainment, that his retirement comes with such a weird feeling to it, if that makes sense. Like, it's like great in one essence, you can celebrate him, but on the other side, like, he's like, Jesus, this guy was like somewhat of a monster, if you think about it, right? Like, very ruthless.
It was hard, because the night that Stephanie came out and he retired, I think I had even texted you, like, I was feeling really weird about it, because I was like, had watched him and this company for so long. I have so much respect for him in a lot of regards of what he's done, that it was a bittersweet moment, right? Like, we had talked about this. We want him to leave. It's time. But on the same token, I still feel a little bit of, oh my God, this is surreal, and I'm a little bit sad. And that's a hard thing to feel, because you don't want to feel sad about him leaving because of what he's done. But again, it's just because he's got those two sides to him, right? So
he does, and I think a lot of wrestling fans are feeling how you're feeling, right? Because you can't ignore what we've been hearing, right? Like, it's impossible to ignore, and it's deplorable how he acted, right? On the other side, like, he's also brought so much joy in our lives, right? So it's really, like, it is so complicated to really know how to feel. Like, I that's how I'm feeling. Like, I watched it when I was a kid, as you know, like, as a teenager. I stopped watching, and then I've now rewatched it, right? And I'm remembering when I was watching as a kid, and how much joy I had. I mean, I joke with you how I would, like, wrestle my pillows and things, like, made championship belts, right? And, like, so he brought joy.
He made an impact,
Like, he brought joy to our lives and to millions of people. But on the other side, he also hurt a lot of people, and in pretty significant ways, right? So I think it's going to take quite, like, the fact that his retirement, he wasn't even in the ring, if it was any other circumstance, he'd be out there announcing his own retirement, right?
100%.
Be a whole show.
There would have been a celebration.
Show of his legacy, right? Because I mean, look what they did with Cena, right?
Think
Like,
what
the
they did
entire
with
show
Flair.
was-
I don't know if you remember
Yeah.
that time when Ric Flair retired,
No.
and it was like a huge thing. Like the entire locker room came out. Everyone was like, Flair, you know, like we appreciate it. Everyone came out, said their kind of piece. The majority of the show was probably around Flair. I would assume the impact that Flair had on the wrestling industry as a wrestler would be very similarly looked at as the impact of Vince had on the wrestling as a promoter.
Yeah.
And his celebration would have been very similar, if not even bigger. And we may have even seen other wrestling companies be involved in thanking him in some way, shape, or form. Because of the problems and the allegations and what he's going through, this is how he retires. His daughter comes
Right,
out
so it's
and
it's
shuts
just
it
one of
down.
those things where like it's valid. It would have been valid to give him something like that, right? But it's also valid to not, right? Like, it's so weird. Like, I've never seen it where, like, in a sport, which is a sports entertainment, so maybe it's a little different, but like where it is this, you know, it's just so mucky and muddy, right? Because there's still rumors that he's because he's still the majority shareholder, right? So,
And that
yes,
doesn't
he's
change.
retired,
Yeah.
but he still has quite a big financial stake in that. So you wonder, like, how far away can he really get from this, right? Because this is his life, right? Like, he built this empire from the ground up. Well, he bought it from his dad, but still, like, he took his dad's product and made it to what it is today, right? So
When his dad was running the company, prior to the 80s, prior to the Eat Your Vitamins era, it was a territorial thing. There was, NWA, there was WWF, there was WWF, there was Tennessee Wrestling, Texas Wrestling, things like that. They were all territorial-based wrestling companies. And until WWE came in, Vince kind of took it from Vince Sr. He was the one who said, let's nationalize this. And maybe we work with some other companies, start swallowing up some other companies. We saw something nationalized, and then we saw those Monday Night Wars between WCW and WWF, and then they kind of they were purchased, and it became globalized, and now it's a huge community. Like, the wrestling community is nowhere near so much more than what it was back in the 80s and even 90s. So yeah, that's a big aspect. But you have to think, with him being out, he has to stay out right now. Even though he has a huge financial gain of it, he's not part of creative. He's fully retired. And I think that's why he used those words. He's retired. He's walking away. So that you don't think, okay, he's semi away, but he's still involved in creative and stuff like that. We all need to know he's out. He's out of creative. Now, this is the one thing I worry about. Let's say he gets proven that he's guilty for what he did in the next 3 months, in the next quarter. Because we know this is going to be a long-term investigation.
Oh, yeah, big time.
Let's say that he gets, in the next few months here, he gets proven guilty. What happens? Does he have to now try to sell off his share because his name's still in the company? Does it go in? Is there some sort of consortium deal that he gets a buyout by multiple people?
Will he go to jail?
Will he? I have my doubts about that. I do.
Yeah,
but
he could, depending on what they find.
He could, depending on what they do find. Or what happens now on the flip side if he somehow walks out of this and is not guilty? Does he come back? Is he involved again? What does that look like? I guess we'll find out when it happens, but it's an interesting thing to think about. Now,
to be
honest, he's
fair,
not gonna he's not gonna probably come out of this not guilty. But
yeah, like, I don't think he would retire if there was any doubt. This was not going to look good on him, right? Even if, like, one of the claims are true. I mean, like, really, it's the Wall Street Journal, right? So they're not going to go and put something out that's not really going to be that accurate. They just have to say it's alleged, but you have to wait till you get all the details. But not looking very good on his part. But yeah, no. So I think, really, like, at the end of it's just, I think for his legacy, it's nice that he retired on his own terms before he was forced out due to these allegations getting worse and worse, because they probably will, right? Like, we've seen the other side of Vince, the not so nice guy, and there's lots of stories about how he treated talent that that move on and have bad medical issues. I mean, WWE fans are paying for WWE stars' medical bills down in the States. So I'm sure more is going to come out about him. So it's nice for the other wing we talked about, which is the good part of Vince, that he's able to retire and we can have some sort of nice closure to something like this. So he gets to go on his terms.
Yeah.
Again, it's sad for the good side that we don't get to really celebrate him. Like, you go get lots of guys to say thank you, you changed my life, because he, again, that's why it's so complicated, because as much as a monster he is and what we've seen, he has made a difference in people's lives, right? You also look at the charitable side of WWE, right? Obviously he's if he was a true monster, he would say no WWE talent's doing charity stuff, but I know
he's
WWE
a huge humanitarian. Huge.
That's one of the biggest things that the stars are known for, is that they do Make-A-Wish, they do lots of community initiatives. I think I saw before, I think Money in the Bank, it was Bianca. A few other stars were at a local Boys and Girls Club playing sports with them right before they're about to do a big show, right? So this is why I think the title of this episode will probably be the complicated legacy of Vince McMahon, because it really is. It is very complicated, because there are so many good things about Vince, but equally so many bad things. And I think we're really going to have to wrestle pardon the pun, wrestle with that as a fan of WWE and as a fan of recognizing what he was to wrestling.
And I think one of the things too is he's been gone for 2 days, and we're already hearing positivity coming out of the locker room with him being gone.
Oh yeah,
and that's not necessarily everybody. There are people who are pissed. One of the biggest things on Friday was Brock basically gave a big FU to the entire company and walked out, and somehow managed to cool down and come back, which is good. I'm glad he did. But he looks at Vince at a very high regard, regardless of what his bad things have been done, because again, he's only a product of his own experiences, and his experience with Vince was good. He had a lot of mentorship from Vince, and that's why he looks at him. Brock's the kind of guy who doesn't trust a lot of people. But on the other side of it, the women's locker room was oh, he's gone. There's such a relief.
Popping champagne bottles, eh?
And it's not even the monster side of him, but it's the fact that Vince didn't give that division the time of day that they deserve. And I think that they look at Stephanie being in there, and Nick and Triple H, they look at it as oh, we're going to get our shot now. We're going to get a chance to be on TV. We're going to get more TV time. We're going to get more of this. So there is some of that coming out too. And that's not necessarily bad, right? Vince is he's just disrespectful to the women's division in that sense, and that's where something is just, oh, you're just a bad boss. But there's just so much more to the bad side of his. There's going to be another episode that comes out that's going to be Dark Side of the Ring, and it's going to be all about Vince McMahon probably in the next couple of years, unfortunately.
HBO apparently is going to do a documentary on these allegations.
Yeah, they were going to do a biography documentary on Vince McMahon. I don't know if you knew about that, but they were going to do a full, kind of celebrate Vince's legacy and what he's done for the wrestling industry. There might have even been a movie that was going to come out. They scrapped it. Because of all of what's come out. But they were going to do all this.
Which again, that's again why it's so complicated, because without the monster side, that's completely valid to make these things about 100%. This man who took this idea of professional wrestling and turned it into what it is today.
Put it this way. Weird example, but put it this way. They've made movies about Ted Bundy, a serial killer.
Yeah, very good point.
Right?
But they're not celebrating Ted Bundy, though.
They're not, but he's still, it's a weird thing. It's a weird catch there, because it's he's not being celebrated, but his story has lived on for so many years of him being an absolute monster, a demon. Yeah. Right? But Vince doing what he did doesn't even equate to that. But it's still horrible, it's still monstrous, and we may see even in years to come that there's a half and half documentary about here's all the good things that he did for the industry, and we wouldn't be where we were in sports entertainment if it wasn't for him. But then here's the dark side of the ring part of him, and this is all he's done. Because we're probably going to see something like that, maybe in 10 years or 15 years or after.
Well, I think you can't. Again, you can't ignore both sides.
You can't ignore both sides.
They're both very. They're both just
they're
so
prominent.
True about him.
Both sides are.
They're both just so true about him, right? And again, so like, yeah, it's. I think his legacy was already gonna be complicated because he's such a ruthless businessman, and there was already
he already had controversies in the past too, right? And he got away with
this just makes it even more, right? So I think for wrestling's sake, I think it's happy that he retired and he can walk away now, and like you said, I think at the end, like you said, through all this, the talent was the one that was unfortunately hurting, right? Like, and we were talking about like we don't really know what's going on, like they seem to be changing scripts like all of a sudden, and there seems to be a lot of infighting in the company versus who's Vince's guy, who's Stephanie's and Paul's guy, right? Like, or guy or girl. So I think that simplifies things too for wrestling, and I do wonder now, like, because last week had a show like SummerSlam wasn't selling very well, so I'm really kind of curious now that Vince is gone, because I wonder if people were like, I don't really want to buy a ticket if I'm sort of funding Vince, right? Like, that doesn't feel right to me, because that's actually Saturday Night Main Event is coming to here in Vancouver, and I was like I don't really feel very good about buying that if I know. Well, mind you, Vince, I guess, is still getting the financial benefit of it because he's still a majority shareholder, but at least he's not involved in the day-to-day. So I think at the end of the day, I'm most happy for the talent, and I'm most happy for the industry, because as much as you can talk about Vince's legacy, it was time for him to go, right? It was time for new folks to get in there and look at look at AEW, right? It's got a youngish C. I don't think Tony Khan's that old. And they're just kind of doing things different, right? And it's nice to see. Like, sometimes it doesn't work. Like, I mean, I know you like the blood, but I'm not a fan of the blood. So
very
the barbed wire
attitude
match
era, yeah.
Not a fan of the barbed wire stuff. But I mean, hey, what did they do? They did that not blood and guts, but where they had the cage and they had the two rings side by side. Like, that's a cool idea.
That was blood and guts, yeah.
Oh, it was blood and guts. Okay.
So Tony Khan is only 39 years old, so he's very very young for a CEO.
39, he owns 2 wrestling companies?
Yeah. And part of the Jacksonville Jaguars as well.
Oh, right. Good for him.
His father, right? His father and him went in together, yeah. And I know
he's gonna buy the now.
Could you imagine?
That'd be amazing.
He's definitely making a name for himself in AEW, and I think regardless of what happened with all these allegations coming out, or if none of these allegations came out, we were getting to a point where, because we were talking about this prior to the allegations even coming forth, we're walking into a point where Vince, it was probably getting to the time where he needed to retire anyways. His brain just wasn't developing the creative mind it was 10 years ago. 20 years ago, and we needed a change. Now,
he's very stuck in his ways, that's for sure.
With that being said, I know we talked about having an episode today where we're probably going to talk about things, and it's going to be a little bit more over an hour. So I just want to go into one more thing before we kind of come to a close here, and that's SummerSlam. I think we got to cover SummerSlam, and we got to quickly just say, one of the things was, like you said, the tickets were not selling. There's a lot of seats still going on here. We have some more matches on the card, which is great, but what do you foresee SummerSlam looking like? Like, I'm really looking forward to Raw tomorrow. I think Raw is going to be it might even be a better show than SummerSlam, to be honest, with everything going on.
It's a good card.
It's a good card. We have Rey Mysterio's 20th anniversary. We have Roman Reigns will be on the card. I'm assuming the Usos will be there as well. Street Profits will be on again.
Yeah, there's going to be a six-man tag tomorrow. They
obviously have to further deepen this whole Theory and Ziggler thing. We have to see something like that. Ray and Dominic are apparently facing a Judgment Day again.
Judgment Day, yep. And then
so
Edge hopefully will come back.
Edge will hopefully... The rumor is he'll come back. Maybe
Bray?
Maybe Bray. Maybe Edge. maybe Edge doesn't even come back till SummerSlam. Maybe they push it just to.
Uh,
Maybe they kind of hint
better come back
tomorrow that he will be
Yeah.
back at SummerSlam. And in his last vignette, he actually was writing in blood. Like he was writing in blood, "I am coming too," and it didn't.
Nothing less, yeah.
It didn't. Yeah. So we don't know, but. I mean, what are you feeling like with the cards coming up? Monday Night Raw, SmackDown, and on Saturday SummerSlam, which we have both anticipated for months, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I've read something that apparently the company's not going to do too much change just because they want to show stability. However, you gotta wonder what's going to happen because people that were being pushed by Vince, he's no longer there. So like, are we actually going to see Roman lose? Because I know he was pushed heavily by Vince, right? And then there's Theory too, right? What does the company as a whole feel about Theory? I think those are the two main ones. I think. Well, there's Liv Morgan too. I think that's another one that I think gets affected by Vince going. Although she got her side plates.
I was going to say to our listeners, she finally did get her side plates.
She got her side plates, and they look awesome. And I think again, she's just making too much money for the WWE and the fans are really. Eating her up, and I think she's a good face. Man, I hope Paul really works with Ronda on her mic. God, she's just so bad on the mic. She's such a good wrestler, but man, she's not good on the mic at all.
I want Paul Heyman to come out and manage her, and I could see something happening, right? Like he was a Brock guy, he's a Roman guy. And you look at Brock's mic skills now, like he's really good on the mic. Roman's great on the mic. And honestly, like I know Roman says the same thing all the time, but he's much better on the mic. He's more believable than he was, 5 years ago. And Paul was a big reason for that for both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Paul could come in and be that guy for Ronda that's going to manage her, and she can be a Paul guy. And I honestly think that would be a really good fit for her. Her to turn to a heel maybe at SummerSlam, and Paul come out and Heyman be,
I think what I'd love to see Liv win, but then Ronda hurt her. You know what I mean? Like
Liv win somehow, like miraculously win, and then Ronda beat her up, and then somehow turn heel. Yeah, I do want to see that too.
That'd be awesome because like she's got the attitude for a heel, but they won't go there. And I'm wondering if now with Stephanie in charge and Paul around, if they explore that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the two biggest thing is the main thing is the Roman question.
Mm-hmm.
There's been talks about WWE not being thrilled with the fact that they have the championships tied up with a guy who's not there very much. Talent is also talking about it, specifically Lashley, and even McIntyre mentioned it on Friday again. So I mean, the fact that they're letting him talk about that on stage, I think, is interesting because he's been talking about it backstage and like on the bump, like those off air kind of shows, but they let him talk about it on the show.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. So I think that's the main question: is will we? Well, we've asked it a few times. Is like, will this finally be the end of the bloodline? End in the sense of like the reign, not like the end of the bloodline, but like end of the reign. I mean, we haven't seen the bloodline together in a long time, so that'll be the first time we'll see them together
since at least 2-3 weeks ago in SmackDown. But it was just a quick promo segment. It wasn't much of a
Theory ran around the ring and then ran away.
There's a lot of speculation that the bloodline, the plans coming from creative right now is the bloodline's going to crumble from within. And if that's the case, that could be an interesting story. They could really roll on that. Like Jimmy
Didn't that happen before?
Well, not really. I guess I would say that like in the beginning, I think it was Jimmy that was feuding with Roman, and that's really what started this whole head of the table bloodline. You're disrespecting me. I'm the head of the table. Jay came back, and then Jay was not with him, but then they all kind of fell in line. So it was kind of the opposite. But I mean, I could see something crumble in the bloodline, and maybe even like they lose to the Street Profits, and then they get frustrated with Roman, saying like, you didn't really protect us that well. You've been all about off the, and then it kind of crumbles from there. Like, you haven't been here. You haven't been helping us, and we've been on every show every week busting our ass. I could see something like that kind of going through, and that would be interesting because it's got some truth to it.
I do hope the Usos get a bit of a break. Like, how sometimes they give breasts because like they've been actually like you're right, like they've been at it for a bit. Like they've been on almost every show. I'm sure they're doing live shows too.
Yeah.
Roman doesn't do a lot of live shows. He's done a few. He's actually coming to Vancouver, but I won't be able to go to when it comes here. But So I do hope, like, I hope they lose because I'd like to see the profits. I mean, they're pushing the profits pretty hard.
I would
especially
see profits having another good like potential final run with the whole potential that Montez Ford might go to a singles competitor. They
same with
just
Dawkins.
definitely need to have a good last run as tag champs for sure.
Yeah, and then they can fight the Vikings on SmackDown, and
because they're getting pushed pretty heavily.
Yeah, fight with New Day. It's like there's a couple tag teams out there, and then they can fight with the Brawling Club too. Like there's a few guys they can start to fight with. It'd be nice to just get a fresh perspective.
I agree
on the belts. And then the biggest question is Roman. Like I think there's still a lot of uncertainty there. Like Brock's also a part timer, but he's available more than Roman is right now. And then there's this whole Theory business, right? Like will Dolph get in the way? Will they have Theory take one belt instead of two, so it's split again? Will he take both? I don't know, because I can see it. Well, Vince is gone, but I can still see a scenario where, because some of Vince's guys are still in creative, right? Where I see a scenario where Theory leaves with no belts. I see a scenario where Theory leaves with all of them, because they're really pushing this youngest ever kind of
I agree.
talk. Right?
I almost feel like we might see it could go either two ways. And I don't know if I would see him getting the U.S. title and the other two, but he might. You might. You might see him do that, and you might be because it just builds his cockiness. And if they decide to keep him as a arrogant heel, then it works. But if they decide to have him go face, then it might not. Now, if he does say lose the U.S. title and he wins both the Universal Undisputed Championship, he has both belts, that could be a good route to go too, because he is a Raw superstar technically, and he could potentially lose one of those belts
at Clash,
maybe to Drew, and then we could see Drew then hold SmackDown together, and maybe Theory holds Raw together, and then he can continue that feud with Bobby. So I mean, it could go either way.
I see him lose. I see Theory taking one, and here's why I see that, because Roman will clash with Roman will fight either Drew or Sheamus, most likely Drew, just because they've been featuring him like hell for it, for a belt. Like it doesn't make a lot of sense to me for him to take both of Roman, because then Roman needs his rematch, right? And you're not going to have Roman do his rematch on the main show. That you need to do that at pay-per-view.
You do,
and you can't do that at Clash because they're already saying Sheamus or Drew will fight for the United fight for the belts at Clash. So you do need someone to either have one or both, and I can't see Theory being the one.
I really wonder how they explain that though, because Theory's been going on about saying he's going to cash in. He's been very forward about cashing in at SummerSlam. And everyone's trying to convince him not to, like the whole Bloodline and Paul and everything. I want to say that it's weird because he's been talking about being the whole WWE Universal Undisputed Champion, which means he's going to have both. But how do you explain that he only takes one?
Maybe let's just say, for example, Roman retains. He's done. He's beat up from fighting. It's TV14 too, hey. So we could see some blood. And then Theory comes out, cashes in, pins Roman. He's got both belts, and then I don't know. Pierce comes out and says, "Well, this is fantastic for you, but the contract only
states you're valid for one belt.
One belt, so you pick which belt you want and you leave one with Roman." I think that'd be actually kind of cool storyline.
That would be an interesting storyline, and then Roman would be able to keep, or Brock, one of them would be able to keep one, and because you got what's his name, McIntyre's feuded with both Roman and Brock, so it would work either way, whoever wins. But
that'd be a cool picture, hey, like if that happened, and then you see a bloodied Roman or Brock laying in the middle of a ring with one belt. That's kind of a cool picture, because
and then Fury holding the other belt above.
Yeah, that'd be kind of cool.
Taking his signature selfie. Another theory that I have, speaking of Theory, is, I don't know, Paul's been so involved with Theory. Paul Heyman, I'm talking about, and like trying to convince him not to cash in on Brock because Brock's a beast, and not on Roman because he needs to respect the bloodline. And we just saw, Theory tag with the Usos and all that jazz, and it didn't really go that well. But I honestly think Paul could turn on Roman, and go and
Yeah.
and be part of Theory's guy
Theory,
now.
because he sees a
He
young,
needs it too,
talented
right?
guy. Yeah.
And if you got
I
Theory
see
backed by
that
Paul
too.
Heyman, I mean, that'll make an interesting story to have Theory backed by
Mhm.
Paul Heyman, for sure.
Yeah, but I can
and a
also see
full-time
like
guy.
I've seen the idea of like a Ziggler will feud with him. He'll stop
Yeah.
him like we've discussed before, and I
Yeah.
think that's a cool storyline too.
It is.
So
They've got a
we
lot of
might get some-
opportunity.
Yeah, we'll see. Monday might give him some clarity. I agree with you. I'd like to hear Dolph actually be on the mic and actually hear what the hell his motivation is to keep attacking Theory.
He keeps kicking Theory, but he's never said a word. So I
Yeah.
think we have to have, because I have my doubts he would be on Friday Night SmackDown right before SummerSlam. Dolph,
Yeah.
I mean. So I would suspect we'll probably see him be there tomorrow. Either, bring up why he's doing what he's doing or something, and then we probably won't see him on Friday, but then we'll probably see Theory cut a promo on Friday night. Because Theory's been on SmackDown for a while now, too.
Yeah, they're pushing him, right? That makes sense. So, but anyways, before we lose all the sunlight and you won't be able to see my pretty face, we should probably stop because we've definitely gone over an hour. But I think it's needed for the heaviness of news that we faced on Friday. So thanks everyone for listening and watching me on my balcony with the dogs, airplanes, and air conditioners, and hearing that as well. So please subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Apple or Spotify, leave a review on all those platforms. And as I always say, my beautifully well lit friend this episode, the video side. Thanks for chatting with me.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everybody. And we'll catch you at the next one.